So, welcome back to Silmarillion Total War and to another battle replay, and today we have something of a rarity, I suppose, by Silmarillion standards, because sieges do tend to be a little bit rarer in Silmarillion than they are in Reforged. I show plenty of sieges on this channel, of course, but when I show off Silmarillion, they do have a tendency to be more open battles, especially as the patches were being developed. But now, hopefully we'll start to see some larger scale battles start to creep their way in now that the public build is out and more of these larger games can happen because more people have access to the up-to-date build. That being said, I do hope that the pitch battles also continue because a little bit of variety is always good, and we don't want to make things too samey. Having said that, this is a rather multifaceted battle anyway, because it looks as though we're going to see a bit of a fight in the outer reaches of the map, as well as in and around the settlement itself. And even then, the settlement is hardly what you would consider to be the mightiest fortress that there is. Plenty of open spaces, plenty of opportunities for the attackers and the defenders to take advantage of this. Another very good looking map from Silmarillion as well. I do really like the trees. I think they add quite a lot, to be fair, because the standard medieval 2 trees do leave a little bit to be desired. And it is going to be a rather interesting theme today. I think the oaths of the sons of Feanor have once again led them down a questionable path as they have convinced the Haladin and the House of Fingolfin to march against Doriath, and Gondolin are going to be heading to the aid of Thingol's troops. So I assume we're somewhere within the girdle, which is rather interesting. Some orcish structures which have been long abandoned as this, not civil war, but definitely war between the two of the good aligned forces of Beleriand, I suppose, as this comes to blows. Anyway, Stewie is the player who we're going to be viewing this battle from the perspective of. He didn't send me it, but I'll still thank him anyway, because I did find it on the battle reports section of the Silmarillion Discord, and he has a bit of a thing for the Haladin, it would seem, definitely a bit of a favourite for him. I butcher the pronunciation of the Haladin, it's worth saying, but it's actually a good thing we're seeing this battle from the Haladin's perspective, because a lot of their units can hide, so the fact that we're seeing them means that we can actually see the entirety of their army for once, whereas most of the time when the Haladin are on the field, to be honest, we'll only see a couple of units here and there. Starting off with the dismounted Mardraut of Malduin, which are a javelin unit, a good javelin unit as well. This is the sort of thing which really offers quite a lot of the punch for the Haladin. Their skirmishers in general are going to be a very important part of how they do things, not just the ability to hide, but also their ability to do damage at range quickly. And the dismounted Mardraut, I believe, are one of the armour-piercing javelins that the House of Haleth have at their disposal. Because of course their infantry is not quite as heavy as a lot of the elven factions that are in the mod, so you can't rely on brute strength alone, even if they do have some rather good damage dealers. The Huskarlar of Thargelion are another interesting unit. They are the axe thrower unit, so again another throwing projectile. This could be quite interesting. A useful supporting faction perhaps are the Haladin when it comes to a siege at backing up a faction which is more about heavy infantry, so they should actually complement the House of Feanor very, very well. We shall see if that does turn out to be the case. Got some Waldschreiter Dragoons as well, a horse archer that does have a shield. A very useful unit of skirmishers. There are other horse archers in the game and other factions in the game which can field horse archers better. Fingolfin, for example, with their Arqueni, the Easterlings through sheer numbers, but this is one of those units which can hide, which is rare for a cavalry unit, but also just the fact they offer a bit of mobility as well helps with making the Haladin an awkward foe to fight. We've got the dismounted version of them here as well, a slightly heavier archer, although they are a half-strength variant, so you do need to be wary that they are a rather small unit, so they're not going to be able to go toe-to-toe with a full-strength unit of heavily armoured elven archers, for example. Warder of Brethil, a few units of them which are basic spears. They too can hide anywhere, but outside of that they're relatively simple in terms of how they work. They're not going to be able to do too much damage to the forces of Gondolin and Doriath in melee here, but it is still important to have a numerous infantry line when you're on the attack, so you can try and find those gaps. The Rigswehr of Brethil, they're a swordsman in melee. They don't have a shield, so again they're pretty fragile to arrow fire, but they also have those javelins at their disposal, so yet more throwing projectiles that the Haladin can bring. In that very same vein, we have the Dour Warder of Ethelbrandia, another javelin unit, albeit they are a bodyguard tier unit for the House of Haleth. Do need to be a little bit careful though, because they're not multiple HP, so in typical Haladin style really, they do have some good damage that they can deal, but they're not going to be quite as resilient as some of the forces that you may send them up against. Warder of Brethil, more Dragoons, more Rigswehr, more Mardraut, more Huskalar, and also we have over here some Freiswehr of Brethel, which are a unit of basic archers. Again, they've got a bit of a buckler, but their armour is very, very basic. But yeah, a cheap unit of archers that again can hide anywhere and have a spear, so if cavalry does decide to get mixed up in them, they might be biting off more than they can chew. Interesting to see no Swearderbroth here, considering they are a heavier unit of line infantry, which could be useful for the settlement, but maybe settling into their role as a more supporting faction here, knowing perhaps that heavier units can certainly be handled over here by Boromir. Rather confusingly, he was in the House of Feanor today. Mounted Company of Caruthin, they will be useful in the more open areas of the map if they can deal with any potential Doriath and Gondolin cavalry, or perhaps they can just harass the infantry as Gondolin decides to, or runs to try and meet up with the defensive position of Doriath. These Javelin cavalry units should be pretty good at picking away at them as they do so, and the Mounted Company are going to be joined by the Roqueni and Magloro, which are a unit of mace cavalry. Very, very frightening force this, one of the scariest singular units of cavalry, if not the scariest unit of cavalry in the game as it stands. Armour piercing and melee with those maces as well, of course. The Otorn Mighty Mo, a fantastic unit of bodyguard infantry, multiple HP, fantastic armour values, good shield. Everything you would want really from a more defensive infantry unit for your bodyguard, so the general should be quite safe. And of course over time they can do a lot of damage as well. Footmen of Amras, who this time around do not have their armour upgrade. Naturally, in a siege like this, you're going to have to cut some corners if you are the attackers, with regards to your budget. But even without their armour upgrade, the Footmen of Amras are still a really, really strong infantry unit, and more than make up for the fact that the Haladin have decided to forego bringing their line infantry today. And doubtless Fingolfin will also have something to say about that as well. Archers of Amrod, good in a skirmish fight then. It'll be interesting to see what the defenders are brought to try and counteract the armour that Feanor brings to the table. So again, some unupgraded defenders of Aglon, more of an aggressive edge to this infantry unit of course, but they forego the shield as a result. And the very impressive Accursed of Alqualonde come back to do a bit more kinslaying, have they? What sets them apart is of course they're better in terms of stats than the defenders of Aglon, but what really sets them apart is the fact they have the Relentless trait, which means they cannot be staggered in melee. It means they can do tremendous amounts of damage really rather quickly to just about anything. And finally, for the attackers, we have the House of Fingolfin, played by Carmul. We have got some Herdsmen of Dorloman, so some Edain auxiliaries, some Marksmen of Barad Ithel, again pretty good in a skirmish fight. They don't have quite the same armour levels as the Archers of Amrod do, but they should still be useful when it comes to trying to take the settlement. Herdsmen of Hithlum have less damage with their bows and less ammunition, but when they're out of ammo they also turn into very nice little units of shock infantry. Speaking of which, one of the scariest single units in the game really, the Sons of Hurin, a truly devastating unit this, with their huge charge bonus, massive armour piercing damage as well. There is a hidden unit here I would imagine. A couple of units of Blade Masters, some Marines of Vinyamar as well, so some basic javelins and some heavy swordsmen, more herdsmen of Hithlum, and more Blade Masters, so not going for a bunch of line infantry, going for a more aggressive infantry build certainly, with a lot of archers. So interesting this, it'll be interesting to see if the mixed approaches of the attackers work out. They may very well have coordinated this with Fingolfin and the Haladin acting in more of a supporting role for the up-close and personal Feanor. Then we have Alexander 10Q playing as Gondolin, coming to the aid of Thingol and his warriors. Got some Axemen of the Pillar. They will be really good in melee against the more lightly armoured Haladin, but they do not have the armour piercing necessary to be able to outperform the likes of Feanor's infantry. But they don't necessarily need to. That might not be their purpose, they're just going to be here as more of a supporting tool. The Shield Bearers of the Tower are a really good line-holding unit. In the absence of a lot of factions having access to a Phalanx unit, the Shield Bearers are kind of the next best thing. They used to actually be better than Pikes at holding the line because you couldn't really surround them that easily. That isn't the case anymore though, so it's much more reasonable. They fit into their niche in a much better way. 3 Marksmen of the Heavenly Arch is a huge monetary commitment. They're very, very expensive, but they're also probably the best unit of heavy archers in the game when it comes to skirmishing with the enemy. You pay a great deal of money for that, but that is something that Gondolin have decided to go for this time around. And then 2 units of bodyguard infantry, the Retainers of the King and the Lords of the Golden Flower, I should say. The line infantry version a little bit more defensive, and then the outstanding Lords of the Golden Flower. Their thing really is monster killing. They've got a bonus against monstrous units. No monsters on the field today, but even so, that 3rd hit point really does make a massive difference. And again, another really big commitment of money here. 2 Knights of the Golden Flower. They're a spectacularly expensive unit of cavalry, this. And it's a dangerous move to bring units like this against Feanor, because this is kind of their whole thing. The Knights of the Golden Flower have got a hugely damaging charge, but they do need to be careful not to stick around for too long in the view of the javelins from the mounted company. Nor do they want to get mixed up in melee with the Rogue Quenny, not for any length of time anyway. They're going to have to try and charge in and out and be on their toes, but a relatively small Gondolin army that. There could be a few hidden units in the trees, I would certainly hope so, and that Alexander hasn't gone overboard with heavy archers and heavy cavalry. Gondolin, after all, are all about having small amounts of certain types of units and spreading out their strengths a little bit more. I wonder about the effectiveness there, but finally we have Lord of Balagost playing as Doriath. They're on home turf today. 2 units of mounted company of Rhaegion, so they will probably be moving out to try and cover Gondolin's retreat into the settlement, and perhaps helping out with the Knights of the Golden Flower as well at trying to win the cavalry battle. With all of this cavalry, they may very well actually be able to do that. I don't think that Feanor will be able to completely overcome all of the odds that are against them. Spear Host of the Girdle, poison javelins combined with being decent light spears in melee, the javelins of course being the important thing, but can they outperform the Haladin at that sort of thing? I mean, under normal circumstances they'd be fairly amicable neighbours, but not this time. Seems the Sons of Feanor have convinced the Haladin to turn against Doriath. Some more Spear Host of the Girdle here, more Spear Host of the Girdle, Girdle units all around. We've got some Wardens of the Girdle as well with their dual axes in melee. The Rhaegion unit's going to be quite important because they'll be able to crack through the armour of some of the heavier Fingolfin and especially of the Feanor units. Not quite so important to have this sort of tool against the Haladin, but still, good to see 3 units of them. Rangers of the Girdle and more Wardens of the Girdle. A little bit further back we have the armour-piercing archers, the Cuthali. Fantastic in melee as well, of course, despite being relatively small in number. Another armour-piercing tool in the Tyr lies down, and they're quite lightly armoured though. They have the look, and mechanically they're quite similar to the kind of thing you'd expect to see from a Syriand. But even so, fantastic damage values on them, as is typical of what Doriath are all about. Axe Guard of Rhaegion, really good at dealing damage. Once again, they'll be fantastic against the Haladin. And they'll even be pretty good against the kind of army that Fingolfin have brought. They'll struggle a little bit more with the armour that Feanor brings to the table, but that is what a unit like this is for. The Donath Ed Mablung, fantastic unit of armour-piercing bodyguard infantry. And that's just about going to be that. There's some Sword Host of Rhaegion in here as well, but aside from that, I think that's just about everything. No spears of Rhaegion, the Shield Guard of Rhaegion, which is kind of interesting because they are very good at holding the line, but perhaps that's what they intend to use the Gondolin spears for. But anyway, without further ado, let's begin. So here we go then, and it does look as though Feanor are going to be moving forward and are going to be trying to skirmish down the moving army of Gondolin, and I think that's a good thing. Too often it's all very prim and proper, and everyone allows everyone to get into the ideal position before actually getting underway. That is not going to be the case this time, and it does mean that the House of Gondolin here, or the Hidden City of Gondolin I should say, and its many houses, are going to have to think about how they move here, because the Mounted Company of Fingolfin are going to be using those javelins to really good effect. Actually, they've already killed off some of the Axemen of the Pillar. They are continuing to also kill off some of these Shield Bearers of the Tower, which are a very good line-holding unit for later on. Now, albeit I'm not entirely sure why the frame rate is taking such a nosedive. Hopefully that will clear up as the battle goes along. But the Knights of the Golden Flower will actually be quite glad that the javelins are being utilised on units other than themselves. As soon as I say that, of course, a couple of volleys do come in and hit the Knights of the Golden Flower. Because if they can get a good charge off into the Mounted Company of Fingolfin without the javelins raining down upon them, that is a good way that they can do damage. Having said that, I do think that the Doriath cavalry, wherever that has sequestered itself away to, does need to come in to the aid of their ally, and that is exactly what's happening now, the Mounted Company of Rhaegion, with the sword cavalry in tow from Doriath. Those Knights of the Golden Flower, with their powers combined, they should be in a pretty good place to start doing some damage. Now here you can see the Mounted Company of Fingolfin are going to take a charge. Javelins were forthcoming, however, upon the charge. There's still some of those Shield Bearers of the Tower in the woods over here. The Mounted Company of Fingolfin. Now, as soon as the charge bonus wears off, the Sword Cavalry here, which is what the Mounted Company of Fingolfin are in melee, should be more than sufficient to start doing some pretty decent damage themselves. Shield Bearers of the Tower on their way across, so Feanor going to need to be on the lookout for that. More cavalry on the way in now as well. Yeah, Feanor are going to have to move back now, otherwise they're going to be broken. With some Doriath cavalry on the way in, as well as some of those spearmen from Gondolin. Feanor are going to have to play this with a little bit more guile and not just go straight up into the enemy and hope that that will be enough to win the day. Now, this company of Regian coming across does complicate things somewhat. You can see that the Feanor cavalry is now largely in full retreat, but with their javelins they can kite, and more of the javelins are being thrown backwards. And anything that scores a hit is likely to result in a kill. See over there, more Mounted Company of Fingolfin, and perhaps they're going to try and overwhelm this singular unit of Doriath cavalry, taking advantage of a little bit of discordant in the ranks, perhaps, or a little bit of disorganisation, I should say. Doriath continuing to chase, but Gondolin actually did pull back. Now Gondolin's lances are going to come down here, so in the long run this might not work out for Feanor, but it is perhaps a little bit of a warning for Doriath and Gondolin. They do need to be in harmony with one another as the battle goes on, otherwise they may very well find themselves overwhelmed as things get into the business end. Really hope the frame rate stops juddering so much. That's a little bit concerning. Perhaps again a little bit of a sign that my hardware might be struggling a little bit lately, which is worrying, but hopefully we don't get any hard resets like we did on Khazad-dûm. Mounted Company coming in here. The Dragoons are also coming into the aid of the Feanor cavalry. Now the Dragoons are okay in melee, but they're finding themselves thoroughly outclassed, especially by the Knights of the Golden Flower. I'm not sure quite where the Roqueni are at this point in time, but they really should be coming forward here, and if the Roqueni were riding with the Mounted Company of Fingolfin, it would give them the advantage in any melee engagements that were happening, because the Roqueni are the best melee cavalry that's on the field, even if the Knights of the Golden Flower are slightly better when it comes to their charging capabilities. Here are the Roqueni now. Not only that, but some of the Warder of Brethil, the Haladin Spearmen are also here, so things are getting a little bit more complicated for both sides now. With Spearmen in tow, this cavalry can't continue to just throw itself against one another. Hard to tell who's got the better end of this engagement so far. I think possibly in terms of how the engagements have gone, you would say the defenders, but it's less important for the attackers to actually win these, and the Mounted Company of Regian being used as a sacrificial lamb there, slamming into the Roqueni, an engagement they most certainly have. Oh my god, I'm so sorry about this frame rate. But yeah, an engagement they had absolutely no chance of winning there. With the Roqueni using those maces, albeit Doriath's armour is not quite up to the same level as certain other cavalry units that you could mention, but even still, the Roqueni's strength in melee against other cavalry units really showing itself there. The Knights of the Golden Flower looking a little bit thinner on the ground than they did at the start of the battle. At this point in time, if I were Gondolin, I would be trying to save the Knights of the Golden Flower for later in the battle, when things get a little bit stretched, when there are less obvious cavalry counters. That's when a unit like this can be absolutely devastating. I want to be a little bit careful there with the Dragoons as they stray a little bit too close to the full ranks here of the Marksmen of the Heavenly Arch, which Alexander 10Q really needs to hope that these marksmen can deliver in a big way, because he spent so much money on 3 units of them, and so much money on 2 units of Knights of the Golden Flower. And already I would say the Knights of the Golden Flower aren't really pulling their weight given the extreme cost they come with. So he is going to need to, I think, save them for later on and try and get his money's worth that way. Need to be a little bit careful about sending forth the Marksmen of the Heavenly Arch without any support as well, because otherwise they could end up getting charged by what remains of the Feanor cavalry. Let's not forget the fact that we still have the Fingolfin army to consider, who at this point in time are the only army that have not had any sort of combat. They don't have any of their cavalry in tow today. Much of their army as well is made up of more aggressive infantry and more supporting archers, so the heavier infantry is going to have to be handled by Feanor, like we mentioned. Over here, Shield Bearers of the Tower. A little bit depleted in places, but still a very good unit for holding the line. And then they've got all of those Axemen of the Pillar. Won't be quite up to the task of taking on the more heavily armoured forces of Feanor, but against some of the more lightly armoured Edain from Fingolfin, and especially against a lot of the units that the Haladin are bringing to the table, provided they don't get kited around and skirmished first, they should be ideal for taking them on. As it is the Haladin that spread over the hill. Only the Warder of Brethil leading the way though. Basic spears not really worth shooting at when there are much more impressive targets that the Heavenly Arch marksman will want to be going after. The Warder of Brethal's presence on the front line will also make frontal charges from the defending cavalry that little bit more difficult. Knights of the Golden Flower don't want to be getting entangled up in spears given the damage that they have already taken. Dismounted Mardrout of Malduin, who have already in range actually, which is kind of interesting. Fryswear of Brethel shooting. Going out to the Warder of Brethel, not sure what the Mounted Company of Rhegium were hoping to accomplish here, because it is spears. Javelins are coming in as well. I mean, is it worth trying to kill this cavalry off though? Getting last samurai'd in a pretty big way, and a full frontal volley. So I think given the range that they have, they might be soft target javelins, the dismounted Mardrout. And they're also spears in melee, so again, it's a puzzling choice from the Mounted Company here as to what actually they're trying to do. I mean, I can understand them trying to charge the Rigswear because they're a little bit more fragile in melee, but yeah, the spider's web of arrow fire and javelins is being unleashed, but could be seen as a bit of a waste, honestly. And now the classic Haladin play, trying to pull their opponents apart a little bit using their javelins that were hidden on the approach, but those Rigswear are taking a real beating at the hands of the marksmen of the Heavenly Arch. When it comes to open warfare here, the Haladin are a poor match for Gondolin. They're going to have to rely on the damage that these javelins are able to do if they are to have any sort of success, I think. Warder of Brethel. Axemen of the Pillar charging in. They'll definitely have the beating of the Warder of Brethel. I wonder if this frame rate problem is the fact that I've got the Nvidia Shadow Play thing open as a result of some of the difficulties I've had with the actual turning on and off of the recording lately. Maybe that's having a detrimental impact. Anyway, dismounted Dragoons. Continuing to fire away. Made of sterner stuff than the Fryswear. You can see there as well the Rigswear trying to get into position, javelins still flying all over the place. It is interesting actually that the Haladin are the ones taking point, given the fact that they are... I mean, the javelins are doing a good job here at doing a lot of damage to the Axemen of the Pillar, but I think they're going to need the added muscle of certainly the Feanor infantry on the front line at some point, because you can see there the poison arrows of the Wardens of the Girdle in the background, continuing to go after the rather fragile Rigswear. And with that poison as well, I can only imagine that it's only a matter of time before the Haladin do start to rout. They are in open terrain after all, and now with the Knights of the Golden Flower coming forward as well, surely this is panic stations for the Haladin. As much as they do have quite a few spears in their ranks, that wasn't the best of charges, but these Haladin warriors are now surrounded on the front line. More javelins coming in. Knights of the Golden Flower continuing to take a few losses. Dismounted Dragoons. And they wield an axe in melee, so yeah, a charge into them is not the worst idea. Plenty of javelins still. More Rigswear. What happened to the Dour Warder? Did they pull back? I can only assume they did, because that is, after all, the bodyguard unit for the Haladin. Dragoons. Mounted Dragoons as well. The Knights of the Golden Flower charging into the Huskarlar, which they are throwing axemen. So not a bad pick there from the Knights of the Golden Flower at all. Further back, Blade Masters of Barad Ithor moving in with some Footmen of Amra, so good to see some of the heavier Elven units from the other two attacking armies starting to make their way toward the front line now as well, because they will be sorely needed if they hope to consolidate these gains. Those marksmen of the Heavenly Arch continuing to fire, firing into all of those skirmishers that continue to push their way forward from the Haladin. The Rigswear are not long for this world. The Axemen of the Pillar continuing to carve their way through them. And there's very little left of the Warder of Brethel also. But also, much as how the Knights of the Golden Flower got in behind enemy lines on the other side, the same is going to be true here of the Rogue Quenny. They're going to slam into the back here of this front line. Need to be a little bit careful though. Shield Bearers of the Tower will be able to do quite a bit of damage in return, and there are also some close range arrow fire into the backs of the Rogue Quenny with their shields pointed the wrong way. You'll scarcely find a more finely armoured unit though. Herdsmen of Hithlum moving forward, and we do have The backline's compromised here with some footmen of Amras getting into all of these Wardens of the Girdle. And the Girdle units, while they are quite multifaceted, when it comes to just a straight-up melee slog, they're not going to be sufficient to bring down the footmen of Amras, especially not when they're going to be backed up as well by some Fingolfin units, the Herdsmen of Hithlum adding a bit of AP. Not the most useful thing against Girdle units, but just a little bit more of an aggressive edge as well. One of these units should probably try and focus down those spear hosts of the Girdle before more poison javelins come their way. I think that's exactly what the Herdsmen are going to be doing now. Yes, indeed it is. Retainers of the King and Lords of the Golden Flower coming outside. It is interesting to see how on the front foot this defence is trying to be. They're not utilising the fortifications as much as I thought maybe they would, and that may very well be to their detriment as the battle goes on, because in the open field the House of Halath has done a pretty good job with their skirmishers. Point blank they're going to be using those throwing axes, but throwing axes of course not AP, and the shields of the shield bearers also absorbing quite a bit of that damage, but they may rout before anything else happens anyway. Marksmen of the Heavenly Arch now putting away their bows that they're out of ammunition and getting into melee. I mean, they are a very good melee combatant, you would certainly hope so, given the sheer cost associated with them. But I don't know, I think they've bitten off a little bit more than they can chew here, I think, Gondolin. Especially ever since Fingolfin and Feanor have arrived on the front line to back the Haladin up. The Dour Warder are on the front line. They've taken a little bit of damage, along with the dismounted Mardrout, but doing okay so far. The Frieswear just continuing to send forward more of their number, the Haladin. Using all of their units early doors, which maybe is not the worst idea. They won't be able to keep pace with any of the other factions on the field today with the composition they have in the more narrow streets within the palisade. So maybe here in more open terrain where they can use their guile a little bit more easily is for the best. There goes the Haladin General though. And that could be pretty important. The Haladin, most susceptible to morale shocks of all of the forces on the field today. They don't have terrible morale, but the loss of the General in Silmarillion is quite an important thing. The Blade Masters pushing forward, more of the Haladin joining them, trying to maintain this momentum that they have gained for themselves. And I don't see why they shouldn't feel confident in doing that. The Roqueni charging in, breaking the spear host of the Girdle. There's still a lot of these footmen of Amras as well, which I still believe that the heavily armoured Feanor units are going to be the heart and soul of this attack in the long run. Spear host of the Girdle. No match for them in melee here. And they still have those Marines of Vinyamar, Herdsmen of Hithlum in the background, presumably launching a few volleys over the palisade to try and go after some of the units that were within the walls still. Could be as well that these arrows are important if, indeed, it is mostly Doriath units that remain at when all is said and done. After all, it was largely Gondolin units out here that have paid the price. Doriath a little bit less armoured than their fellow elves that are on the field today. Still far superior in that regard than the Haladin, however. More spear hosts of the Girdle perhaps trying to buy a little bit of extra time for more units to escape. Rangers of the Girdle are out here as well. Huskarlar in melee. I wasn't expecting the Haladin to be the ones to be so aggressive earlier on though. Like I said, I was expecting them to be more of a supporting faction with their javelins. Perhaps that's what Stewie thought he was going to be doing as well, but as the battle took its shape, he saw the opportunity to use all of his javelins and axe throwers in more open ground against Gondolin, and I do think that is to the Haladin's credit on this occasion. Dismounted Mardrout pushing forward with some Warder still, but they are having a hard time of it here against the Marksmen of the Heavenly Arch, who presumably have managed to rack up a pretty decent kill count against the Haladin, both at range and in melee, but has it been enough? I'm not sure. The fact that the Haladin are still standing in any capacity leads me to believe that it wasn't money well spent. Footmen of Amras. Perhaps they were expecting a big old skirmish against Archers of Amrod and Marksmen of Beredaithel. That hasn't turned out to be the case though. Blade Masters of Beredaithel getting in here, finishing off what little remains of the Girdle units outside of the walls. Now, I do not believe these gates, like while they are closed, I believe you can pass through them in normal fashion, because this isn't It's one of those sieges where you don't need to bring siege equipment, and indeed the attackers haven't brought any, so you would certainly hope that would be the case. Mounted Company of Fingolfin still lurking around the outer edges. Only cavalry still within the walls. I don't think the Knights of the Golden Flower are still alive. I think they got a little bit too gung-ho earlier on, and indeed all of the Doriath cavalry has also been used, so the defenders, it's in their best interest, I think, to keep a tight formation now and try and approach this battle in that way. They have got some Axguard of Rhegion. Again, if the intent was to try and meet the Haladin in the open field, I can't help but feel as though the Axguard could have been a good choice for trying to do that, because they're going to be so dominant against all of the Haladin infantry with that high damage that axe and shield units possess. Sword Host are also over here. To be fair, there has been quite a lot of carnage wrought out here, but for me, the attackers are the ones that are on the right side of it. Those marksmen that have on the arch continuing to carve their way through a lot of these Haladin units. The poor warder of Brethel being asked to tackle a foe that they've got no business fighting against, but the Dower Warder and the Mardrout Dragoons to a lesser extent as well will have what it takes to eventually bring these guys down, and also with some Footmen of Amras on the approach, they're finally going to completely secure the outside of the settlement's walls. The Silmaril draws ever closer for the Sons of Feanor, who undoubtedly are the ones responsible for this. And they are going to move in immediately as well, with immediate effect. Not the worst idea this either, to send the Footmen of Amras in first, because they won't be quite as susceptible to the higher base damage of the Axguard of Rhegion. Now that they've decided to move in though, they will need to keep up the pressure. Blade Masters, a lot of those reinforcements are a little bit further away perhaps. Are we seeing the other walls also get pressured? Yes, we are. Interesting to see this. Warriors of Rhegion coming outside the walls, and they may live to regret that as well, because immediately as they do so, the Marksmen of Barad-Ithel are going to rain some damage down upon them. And this is the wrong way around, really. The Warriors of Rhegion want to be going up against the Sons of Feanor infantry, because that armour piercing will be priceless against them. And I can't help but feel as though Belagost has fallen for some bait here, sending forward a lone unit of Fursmen of Dorlomin. Yes, these Warriors of Rhegion are going to squash them in melee. These basic Hedine spears are not going to be enough to withstand the damage that these warriors are going to be chucking out, but if they continue to shoot with all of these arrows, then it is going to be a good engagement, I think, for the attackers, especially as well with the Rogue Quenny coming out here, choosing to take to the open field when the cavalry engagement has long not been in your favour. They're quite lucky there, actually, that the cavalry decided to connect mostly with their friendly units. That Rogue Quenny can do an awful lot of damage. Huskarlar of Thargelion trying to manoeuvre into position as well to use their throwing axes. He's doubling down though here, is Belagost. He's going to commit more units outside the walls, and I don't know. Cuthalim shooting in. But again, is there really a target out here that's worth the Cuthalim's arrows? The Marines of Vinyamar certainly are not. They're not worth the attention of a unit so grand. The Blade Masters would be a better target, honestly. I can understand his fear of the throwing projectiles at this point, but I'm not so sure. Over here, meanwhile, Feanor have been stopped dead in their tracks. A lot of that has to do with the fact there's a lot of heavier Doriath units over here, and let's not forget that there's some Lords of the Golden Flower in here as well, so Feanor well and truly meeting their match in terms of infantry there. The Otorn potentially going forward as well. I think Feanor, they just need to keep up the assault over there, make sure that they have to continue to commit more units forward. Blade Master Barad-Ithel moving in, who should fancy their chances in melee against a slightly depleted host of Warriors of Rhegion, especially with the Rogue Quenny dancing around this part of the field. Still more arrows coming into the Warriors of Rhegion. The Huskarlar, all they need to do is hold them in place for a little while longer as the cavalry and archers continue to ply their grisly trade. I really don't think that was a good idea to bring 3 units of Warriors of Rhegion out here, because they're such an important unit to Doriath with the damage they can chuck out, but they have been dealt with. They've done damage, but to units that are ultimately not all that important. And I think Fingolfin and the Haladin between them will be quite pleased with how this has gone. And try and break them, I suppose. I mean, Roqueni have looked healthier. I would assume that the Cuthalim have also been contributing to their downfall. But the Roqueni also will be less and less useful as the battle becomes all about the conquest of the settlement, or attempted conquest. Blade Masters are moving in. A battle of attrition this will be. One that traditionally you would imagine Feanor and Fingolfin would have the edge over Doriath in, but maybe Doriath can do damage quickly enough here, considering they're still being backed up by the best of the Gondolin units. The Lords of the Golden Flower are a monstrous infantry unit, quite possibly the single best unit of infantry in the game, depending upon what your criteria are for that. But they're 3 HP, massively powerful, or massively damaging in melee, I should say. And they will be able to deal damage even through the House of Feanor's very fine armour. The Otorn are being committed now, which should keep this assault going. What do they have left? I mean, the Accursed are still ready to be committed. When things are a little bit more depleted in there, they could be the sort of thing which tip things over the edge. More Blade Masters are further back there, and the Sons of Húrin, so the attackers still have plenty of quality in the back pocket. They do need to be a little bit careful. If the attack completely falls apart, it will be to their detriment. And the Huskal are, at this point, only 10 of them remain, 8 warriors. The warriors should be enough here to finish off this patch of resistance. There's still some dragoons firing some arrows over the walls, but the Cuthalim won't mind about that too much. Unlike the standard Region units, they most certainly can keep pace with their fellow elves when it comes to their armour and their multiple HP. But are they, again, being drawn into using their arrows on unworthy targets? Possibly. I mean, the fact that there are still those Sons of Húrin around, the Cuthalim's arrows might be your best bet of dealing with them at this point in proceedings. Blade Masters trying to creep around the edge of this front line over here, but Doriath not allowing them to do so easily. Some of the Axe Guard fighting them off. I mean, they're doing well here in melee. Those Lords of the Golden Flower are just monstering their way through. Even this good quality Feanor infantry. In comes some marksmen to keep this assault going. That's good, just for the numbers, just to try and keep this attack heading in the right direction. They need to get some of their ranged units in here, honestly, I think, to try and do some damage to the Region forces. If they're able to, that could be absolutely vital. Is that what they're trying to do with these marksmen? Possibly. They may be forced into committing forward some of these more heavy elven swordsmen before they ideally wanted to. And I think perhaps they also need to start thinking about a full-blooded infantry assault over here as well. Yes, there are some retainers of the king and some marksmen of the Heavenly Arch that are depleted, but this is a far less intimidating force than the one that's holding the other gate, and indeed they're actually able to pass into the settlement, albeit with a very small force, much quicker than they were able to on the other side. Warder of Brethel and some Mardrout, so the Haladin being allowed passage. Maybe more of the human units from Fingolfin could also come over here and start asking the question of the defenders over here. They could go around and try and support. I mean, it's a very depleted force that the Haladin have at their disposal at this point, but they're trying to make the best of what they have. Yeah, those dragoons really don't want any part of trying to engage a fully healthy unit of retainers of the king. Indeed not. Meanwhile, the Accursed of Alqualonde being sent in now. They should do quite well, honestly, against the Doriath units that are in here. But the real concern, I think, is going to be the fact that those Lords of the Golden Flower, they've taken a few losses now. The hit points starting to be burnt down a little bit. The Otorn putting up more of a fight than the other units that were in here. But it's still such an impressive unit to try and take on, and some Sword Host also being committed in to try and keep this front line solid. Arrows being used, Marksman Baradithel trying to shoot in, and it's not an ideal shot, but it's the best that they have. And it's worth doing, I think, especially now that you can see some of these units are actually shaken as a result of the infantry engagement and being shot in the back, so they should absolutely try and carry that on, and maybe by going too hard or committing all of those units to that gate over there, they're leaving themselves open to the Haladin attacking them from the rear. It's not an overwhelming force by any means, but it's still a real worry here for Doriath. The fact they are going to get attacked from the side, and the Mardrout of Malduin are also a very decent unit by the Haladin's standards. There's other units they have in here as well. And Marines of Vinyamar, are they going to get point-blank shots? Try and pull these Gondolin infantry units out of position. They're not going to grace us with a volley while we're there, unfortunately for us. And now in come the Haladin units. There goes the Feanor general though. Again, those Lords of the Golden Flower are so nasty in melee. Flaming arrows coming in. They're trying to break Doriath here, at least this section of the Doriath line. They're now surrounded in melee and taking flaming shot. So it would not surprise me to see these Region units rout, even though they are of high quality. They're being put under a lot of pressure here. What remains of the Dour Warder are also coming in, only 13 of them, but still a good quality unit. The Huskala. This front line at this point is completely surrounded. With that, yeah, it's hard to see any other result than an attacking victory here. I'd be very surprised if that was the case. Yeah, we're starting to see quite a bit of routing. Positioning is key here, and the Haladin have seen an opportunity and they've taken it, even with lower quality units than those that they're fighting, and this, you would have to imagine, is probably the end, with the Accursed of Alqualonde holding things down on the other side as well. They're going to be carving their way through what remains of the Region units, and that is not good. That may very well be game, set and match. What's happening over on the other side? Are they going to try and move in now? The Javelin's doing their thing, and you can see completely uncontested. I mean, if you're Gondolin at this point, you may very well want to continue to hold this defensive position, but you've let the Marines of Vinyamar have their way with you, and that is not going to go well for you. They're going to commit themselves to melee. The Marines, not exactly fantastic in melee. I mean, they can hold their own, they're decent as the game wears on to just give you another wave of an infantry assault, but against something like Retainers of the King, they will need a little bit of backup, but there are Blade Masters on the way forward. Whatever happens to the Sons of Hurin? Are they moving up now? There they are, 54 of them. They may be committed too late to actually get involved with the battle at all. Held in reserve too long for any glory of their own. What remains of Doriath, and you know, they're putting up a fight here. The Lords of the Golden Flower are still in there, but not enough of them anymore to carry their team to victory, I would imagine. Sword Host, defeat seems certain. I mean, certainly the Haladin will probably be feeling the pressure as well. Not enjoying being in melee with all of this damaging Doriath infantry. Nine Dour Warder still alive. I mean, considering the amount of action that the Dour Warder have seen against very impressive foes, the fact that there are any of them left alive at all is a testament to the fact that they are fairly resilient even without a second hit point. It is to their credit. What's going on now? Are they going to try and hold the bridge? Yes, they are, with some Donath, the Tiren Lysdanen and the Cuthalin. 3 units only, though, is not going to be enough. As deadly as the armour-piercing damage can be from both of those 2 units at range, and of course the Donath in melee, they've left themselves far too thin on the ground to try and hold the bridge with that amount of units. They'll be able to fill their boots in terms of kills a little bit more than they have at the moment. But yeah, the defenders here just not quite organised enough, I don't think. Some highly questionable decisions going on as well. And the attackers ultimately with some good choices, I think. The Haladin taking the lead in the early game so they could pull the enemy apart a little bit, Gondolin primarily, and use their throwing projectiles turned out to be certainly the right call. And as the battle wore on as well, their heavier elven allies started to pick up more and more of the slack. And more of the Haladin again surrounding another defensive position, the Dragoons. The Gondolin general falls. And that now surely will be the end of them. Yeah, they're running. They've routed. Gondolin flee. Marksman Baradithor moving forward. Cavalry still outside, and at this point it's just a race to see who can get the most glory, really, because yes, you're going to take damage at the hands of this nasty Doriath defence, but ultimately whoever gets into melee first is also more likely to get some kills. The Donath taking some damage. I'm not sure why this battle actually is still going on for this amount of frames, if I'm being brutally honest. Maybe Doriath have got more holding power left than I gave them credit for. I'm not sure what the Sons of Hurin are doing. Again, they are going to leave the battlefield, perhaps with their axes unbloodied. The ultimate shame belongs to them, if that is the case. And it's actually the Haladin that are being pushed forward as cannon fodder first. Dismounted Mardral. I mean, these Haladin units are not going to stand a chance against something as strong as Doriath in melee, but just to soften them up a little bit more, perhaps. Tyrann lies down and Cuthalion. The Doriath have also moved forward a little bit too far for those 2 armor-piercing ranged units to really get ideal shots. This one dismounted Mardral actually managing to get through the line. That's impressive in its own way, but he's also going to get absolutely clobbered, as he just did, by one of those Fists of Mablung. Tyrann lies down and getting into position. Now they're going to be throwing their axes. They'll do a lot of damage here, the Tyrann lies down, but they also won't be enough to win the battle for them, and they're also taking javelin fire themselves. And they are lightly armoured, like I said, both in terms of their look and in terms of their armour statistics. They bear more in common perhaps with a unit from Assyrian than with Doriath. Those throwing axes. Most of the kills actually being done to the Marines of Vinyamar, though, even though I'm sure the intended target are the accursed of Alqualonde. But at this point, I suppose for Doriath, it's all about trying to inflate that kill count of yours to try and make that just a little bit more impressive. Those Doriath and Mablung are going to do some pretty nasty damage as this carries on, though. Marksmen of Barad-Ithel, Archers of Amrod. They really are intent on just sending forward their units into the meat grinder here. Archers of Amrod getting into melee. I mean, they still have the Sons of Hurin, so when all is said and done, how close is it? I mean, not the closest battle we've ever seen, to be sure, but we get to see a bit more Silmarillion in a siege context, which is something we haven't seen enough of on my channel as of late. Cuthalion out of ammunition by the looks of things, so yet more very high quality Sindar going to be joining the fray. And the Sons of Feanor will claim the Silmaril, unless it has already been moved from this location. We do have a decent shield value, I suppose, from the front, Tyrann lies down, but still going after the Marines of Vinyamar. I'm not sure why Balagost has targeted the Marines down as such an important target. I mean, at this point it doesn't really matter, but we've seen the Cuthalion and the Tyrann lies down used on the Marines of Vinyamar, and there are other things in the armies that are just more important. Although I suppose he doesn't have the luxury of going for them at this point. Tyrann lies down and are now running, fleeing for the hills as the marksmen are shooting at them. In come the accursed, in come some herdsmen of Hithlum. A bit more damage to try and force the issue against this intimidating looking Doriath front line, as the Great Maces and Elven Longswords continue to mete out some punishment. The accursed of Alqualonde engaging in some kinslaying is their favourite activity, I'm sure. And where are they going? Perhaps to try and get the Silmaril to move it? Flee into the hills? Still. Where are the Sons of Hurin? There they are. About time they got involved, isn't it? Finally leave no doubt in this battle. I mean, there is no doubt anyway, to be honest, but I don't know, we've seen stranger things, I suppose. 70 accursed. 59 Blade Masters of Barad-Ithel going to be joining in. Some more Blade Masters. Still some Dragoons left alive, which, considering they've been in, again, quite a few melee engagements of their own, that is pretty impressive. Yeah, they're just waiting at the top of the hill, hoping to maybe get a few volleys into units as they move forward. It's a fool's hope at this point for Doriath. What have we here? Another very large unit of Blade Masters moving in. Plenty of Elven heavy swordsmen trying to do their thing, and they're going to try and push through here, I think, which, as soon as that line loses its cohesion, we're going to rapidly reach our conclusion here. Anything left down here? Nope. A hard no on that front. 33 Marines of Vinyamal. Just getting as much as they can on the front line now to presumably try and break Doriath's will. This herdsman of Hithlum actually has managed to make it all the way through. What a hero. I'm sure he's feeling very accomplished. Doriath's line's still kind of holding there. All those herdsmen going to be trying to use their axes. Armour piercing will be useful against the heaviest of all of Doriath's units. A fine collection indeed. Fingol himself is in there. You can see him with his crown, taking axe blows from every angle. But also continuing to do his thing, utilising his sword well. And yeah, if they push through with their cavalry, the cavalry's got higher mass, so that will surely be the end. But to give Doriath their credit, they are being pushed against, and their line held up better than I thought it would. But with all of these men of Hithlum getting through now, the cavalry on the way in, the damage was done to the defenders' hopes earlier on in the battle after all. And now utterly surrounded, and now they're going to be slaughtered surely. But someone by now would have been able to claim the Silmaril from the top of the hill there and sequester it away, swim across and get out of here. So perhaps Feanor have taken too long. The physical victory may be theirs, but maybe there's more to this than meets the eye. This was just a standard battle, it's not part of a series or anything, so we couldn't follow this up if that were the case. There are the accursed. Still 40 of them left, but they took a bit of a beating there. At least 30 of them dying at the hands of the Donath and the Cuthalin. Real clash of the Titans. Not multiple HP, the accursed, but the amount of damage they can do to units is pretty startling. Finally, there goes Thingol. Fingolfin's army claims that. The Sons of Hurin move in now, but after the battle was already well and truly won. So that is going to be that. And now, pushing up the hill, the Mounted Company of Fingolfin are going to try and charge in here to finish off what remains of the Doriath forces. The Tiren Lysdannen, the last unit left standing for the defenders. Shields up, axes out. They are going to have to get into melee here. But that is going to be that. Cavalry will take a little bit of time to kill them off. The Dragoons, there's one Huskarlar left alive, which, fair play to him. Marines pushing up the hill, Herdsmen of Hithlum. But yeah, definitely the right team won this. They were more organised all around and just made the correct choices where the defenders didn't, the attackers. And when the defenders are outnumbered by an army like this, as I've said several times, if you make questionable choices, it's going to be amplified for you compared to if the attackers do the same. Feanor victorious. There's more kinslaying to be done, it seems. This is the settlement layout we've seen before for Silmarillion as well. It's one of the ones that I think they intend to use on the campaign map as a sort of standard elven settlement. And I like that idea. You can utilise the bridge very nicely against the AI. Tiren Lysdannen actually doing quite a good job against that Mounted Company of Fingolfin, but that will most certainly not be the case against the Accursed of Alqualonde. Without good armour. Javelins coming in as well. They're going to rout. They're not going to be killed till the last man. They will break in the face of such savage foes before they... And there they go, last stand. And Belagost admits defeat. So there we are. Interesting little battle. Nice to see Silmarillion in a siege again. Because most of what we've seen recently from Silmarillion has been, well, for a few months now in fact, has been more open battles, free-for-alls and the like. But now we get to see a settlement. And a settlement that if you are waiting on the Silmarillion campaign, you should get acquainted with, because, as I just said, this is the settlement layout which I think is going to be making an appearance there, and the next update is going to be focused around the campaign as well, which is going to be a while yet, but that is worth bearing in mind as well. But yeah, the attackers I think deserve to win this, and the Haladin got the most kills, but that's because they were the ones that went in first, and they were active throughout the entirety of the fight, whereas Feanor and especially Fingolfin actually held back, were a little bit more withdrawn. Understandable though, given the amount of archers that Fingolfin were rolling with today. But yeah, the defenders, I'm sure if they could have played this battle again, they certainly would have done things differently. I think both Doriath and Gondolin committed units to situations which they wouldn't do had they the ability to fight this battle again. But let's see what did the damage for the Haladin. The Dour Warder doing their damage with their projectiles and in melee, again showing themselves to be a very good unit indeed. So while I'm still sceptical about the fact that some bodyguard tier units don't have a second hit point, I can understand why it's appropriate in some cases, especially with factions like the Haladin and the Green Elves. But on this occasion, they have proven to be a very strong unit indeed, facing down two very, very nasty elven factions on the defence and not being found wanting. The Warder of Brethil actually getting a decent amount of kills, one of them, the rest obviously not, because they were sent in against Gondolin, and they were really just intended to be a front line, which was okay at best. The Rigswehr were one of those units which were focused down by the extensive Gondolin firing line, but having said that, the Rigswehr are a far cheaper unit than the Marksmen of the Heavenly Arch, so I don't think Stewie will care too much about that. Dismounted Mardrat were active throughout the entire fight and got a decent amount of kills considering the calibre of their opponents, but the Huskarlar, very, very nice. Very nice kill counts indeed. Again, you have to take into account the level of the opponents they were up against, and considering the Haladin primarily fought Gondolin throughout most of the field, it was only really into the late game when the battle was in their favour that the Haladin started to encounter Doriath in higher numbers. So, very impressive indeed. Also, army composition wise, I think that especially Gondolin probably wasn't the best idea to go that heavy into the Marksmen of the Heavenly Arch and the Knights of the Golden Flower and bring both of the bodyguard tier infantry units. That's so expensive, and as a result they didn't really have the ability to help hold the line in perhaps the ways they needed to in order to be victorious here. Nonetheless, big thank you to Stewie. He didn't send this replay to me, like I said, in the composition phase, but it was posted on the Discord, so I helped myself as I was told that I could. So yeah, hopefully we will see more of this in the future from Silmarillion. Big thank you to all of the players as well for being a part of this battle replay. As for what's next, I mean, this recording is actually the last one I'm going to be doing before I go back on call, so from my perspective it would be the last time I interact with Total War for at least a couple of weeks, I would say, but more likely 3 weeks. From your perspective, though, of course, it will be seamless. You won't notice this at all. But the next replay that I do will be back over in Reforged, and it is likely to be either Merlond or Umbar, so settlements that we've seen several times in the past, or perhaps it could be one of the river crossing battle, I should say, that I was given as well. That's a possibility. We'll have to wait and see. I'll make up my mind when I get back from being out for work, though. Other than that, though, by the time I get back as well, it might also be time for me to start thinking about doing another stream. I'll sort of combine that with a little update on what's going on for the channel, with maybe playing a couple of smaller scale battles on possibly Silmarillion. If I don't get any, if I don't see any Silmarillion replays I think would really fit the bill until then maybe we will do that. If I do, however, then we could also do the same, just with Reforged. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say on that count. Big thank you to everyone involved in this battle once again. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.